justice, a word etched into the foundations of civilization, a concept debated by kings, warriors, and scholars for millennia. But in the 20th century, one man dared to reimagine it entirely, a thinker who challenged the world to see fairness not as power, not as tradition, but as a moral imperative. This is the story of John Rawls. Born into a world torn by war, shaped by inequality, Rawls would craft a philosophy so revolutionary that it would redefine democracy itself. But his journey was not one of grand battles or public fame. It was a quiet, relentless pursuit of an idea, one that would change the course of history. Baltimore, 1921, a city of contrasts, wealth and poverty, progress and prejudice. Here, in a nation still reeling from the First World War, a young John Rawls took his first breath. His childhood was marked by tragedy, the death of his two younger brothers from illnesses they could have survived with better care, left a wound that never fully healed. Some say it was here, in the face of such senseless loss, that Rawls first questioned the fairness of the world. By the time he reached Princeton University, the world was at war again. Rawls, like so many of his generation, enlisted. But unlike the soldiers who returned with tales of heroism, Rawls came back with something else, a burning question. What kind of society sends its young men to die in trenches and jungles? What kind of system allows suffering on such a scale? The answers, he realized, lay not in the battlefield, but in the very foundations of how we structure our societies. Harvard, 1950. The world was locked in a Cold War, ideologies clashing like titans. Capitalism versus communism, freedom versus control. But Rawls was not interested in picking sides. He sought something deeper, a theory of justice that transcended politics. And then it came to him, a thought experiment so simple, yet so radical, it would shake the world of political philosophy to its core. Imagine, Rawls proposed, that you were tasked with designing a new society. But there was a catch. You would not know where in that society you would end up. Rich or poor, powerful or oppressed, healthy or sick, you could be anyone. Under this veil, Rawls argued, true justice could emerge. No rational person would create a system where they might suffer. Instead, they would build fairness into its very bones. It was an idea so profound that it would redefine modern ethics. But Rawls was just getting started. His masterpiece, A Theory of Justice, would soon set the intellectual world ablaze. But with fame came fierce opposition. Critics attacked him from all sides. Governments feared his ideas. And yet, Rawls pressed on, because the fight for justice was never meant to be easy. Ideas are fragile things, born in silence, nurtured in doubt, and when they challenge the world pushes back. John Rawls had dared to imagine a fairer society, but the moment his philosophy left the pages of his notebooks, it entered a battlefield. The stakes? Nothing less than the soul of democracy itself. 1971. The Vietnam War raged. The civil rights movement had shaken America to its core, and in this storm of upheaval, Rawls unveiled his life's work. At its heart was a radical proposition. Justice is not about rewards or punishments. It is about fairness. And fairness, Rawls argued, could only be achieved if we design society from behind a veil of ignorance, where no one knew their place in it. Two principles emerged from this thought experiment: liberty for all, and inequality only if it benefits the least fortunate. It was a direct challenge to the world's power structures, and not everyone was ready to listen. The backlash was swift. From the left, Marxists accused Rawls of being too soft on capitalism. From the right, libertarians called his ideas a blueprint for tyranny. Robert Nozick, his fiercest rival, fired back with anarchy, state, and utopia, arguing that any redistribution of wealth was theft. The debate became a war of ideologies, but Rawls was unmoved. He had not written his theory for fame. He had written it because he believed deeply, unshakably, that a better world was possible. Rawls was no firebrand. He spoke in careful, measured tones. He avoided the spotlight, and yet his words spread like wildfire. His philosophy became the backbone of modern social democracy. Welfare systems, human rights law, even constitutions, all bore the imprint of his thought. But as his fame grew, so did the weight of his own question: could society ever ever truly be just? In his final years, Rawls would turn to an even darker question. What happens when justice fails? When nations ignore fairness? When power crushes the weak? His answer would shock the world once more. Every philosopher has their moment of reckoning. For John Rawls, it came not in the halls of Harvard, not in the pages of his celebrated works, but in the silence of his own conscience. The world had changed. The Cold War had ended, but new horrors had emerged. Genocide, famine, wars without end. And Rawls faced a terrible question. What if justice was impossible? 1993, the Rwandan genocide, Bosnia in flames. Rawls watched as the world stood by, paralyzed. His theory had redefined fairness within nations. But what about between them? He had spent his life arguing that society must protect its weakest. But now, entire peoples were being abandoned. The veil of ignorance, it seemed, had its limits. And so, in his final years, he set out to do the impossible, extend justice to the world itself. The result was controversial. Rawls argued that liberal democracies had a duty to stop oppression, but not to force their ideals on others. Even tyrannies, he said, had a right to self-determination, as long as they didn't massacre their own. Critics erupted. How could the man who invented modern fairness tolerate dictators? Had age softened him, or had he seen something darker? That justice in an unjust world requires compromise. In 2002, as illness took hold, Rawls was asked one final question. Did he still believe in his theory? After all the suffering, all the failures, was justice still possible? His answer was simple. It must be. John Rawls died on November 24, 2002, but his ideas? They outlived him in courtrooms and constitutions, in protests and revolutions. His ghost still whispers. The question is no longer whether his vision was perfect. It's whether we're brave enough to keep trying. Some voices never fade. They linger in the spaces between what was and what could be. John Rawls is gone, but 20 years after his death, his question haunts us louder than ever. What does a truly fair society look like? Look around. His fingerprints are everywhere. Judge citing Rawls in a landmark ruling. A politician quoting him in a debate. Protest signs with Rawlsian phrases. Justice for the least advantaged. Because Rawls gave us something radical, a moral compass for policy. Not what helps the powerful, but what would we choose if we didn't know our place in the world? But here's the tragedy. The more his ideas spread, the more the world resisted them. Politicians laughing off wealth taxes. A millionaire shouting socialism at a Rawls quoting activist. Rawls dreamed of a society where inequality only exists if it helps the poor. Instead, the richest 1% now own half the world. The veil of ignorance, torn apart by tribalism, by greed, by the desperate fear of losing privilege. Was he naive, or are we the ones who failed? In his final interview, Rawls was asked if philosophy could really change anything. His answer? Not alone, but ideas arm the willing. That's his real legacy. Not a perfect blueprint, but a weapon. A way to force power to answer one simple question. How do you justify this? So here we are, at the end of Rawls' story and the beginning of ours. If these stories of ideas that shape the world matter to you, be part of this journey. Subscribe to The Past Unfolded, because history isn't just about what happened, it's about what happens next.